My manager told me to my face I'd never move up in this company, smirking while he said it. The second I thought it was over, the HR director slid one document across the table that made his whole face drain of color. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and someone else's ambition. I'd been in that building for 6 years, and I'd never once been summoned before 8 in the morning. So when the calendar invite hit my phone at 7:49, no subject line, Ryan Cole and Carol Vance listed as attendees, 15 minutes blocked, I already knew something was wrong. I didn't know how wrong. I walked in still wearing my laptop bag. I hadn't even made it to my desk. Ryan was already seated at the head of the mahogany conference table. He had that posture he only used when he felt completely untouchable. Leaned back, shoulders square, hands loose on the armrests like a man presiding over something that already belonged to him. Carol Vance sat quietly at the far end, reading glasses on, a manila folder closed in front of her. I'd spoken to Carol maybe twice in 6 years. That registered somewhere in the back of my mind, but I didn't have time to think about it. Ryan started talking before I could sit down all the way. The senior project manager position had been filled internally. He'd selected Jess Park. More leadership presence, he said. More strategic vision. More executive presence. He used that phrase twice in under a minute, and both times it landed like he designed it specifically to sting, because executive presence was the exact phrase I'd used in my own promotion application 3 months earlier when describing what I believed I brought to the team. He'd read my application. He remembered that phrase, and he was using it now to tell me I didn't have the thing I'd said I did. I kept my face neutral. I said, "Can you tell me what specifically informed that assessment?" Ryan smiled, not a polite smile, the other kind. The kind where you can see someone enjoying something they've been looking forward to for a while. He said I should probably start looking at entry-level roles at other companies. Entry-level. He let the words sit in the air. He said it like he was giving me career advice. Like he was doing me a favor by being honest. Like he'd done me the service of sparing me the delusion. I was 34 years old with a 93% project success rate, 12 major clients brought in over the last 18 months, and a track record that any objective person in that building would have recognized as exceptional. And this man was sitting across a mahogany conference table telling me to start over. The smirk was still there. It wasn't going anywhere. "Ryan." Carol's voice came from the far end of the table. Quiet, precise, not loud, but somehow it filled the room completely. "Before this meeting concludes, there is one more document that needs to be reviewed." Ryan's hands went still on the armrests. "That won't be necessary," he said, too fast. He cleared his throat and reset his tone. "Everything has been properly documented. The decision was made through the appropriate channels." Carol didn't look at him. She opened the manila folder with both hands, very deliberately, the way someone opens something when they want the person across from them to understand that they've been waiting to open it. She pulled out a thick sheaf of papers, maybe 11 or 12 pages, and she slid it across the table. Not to Ryan, to me. I looked down. At the top of the first page, in the letterhead of Meridian Solutions' Internal Audit Division, were 4 words: Performance Evaluation Irregularities, Confidential Review. My name was in the subject line. So was Ryan Cole's. The document was dated 2 weeks earlier. I started reading. My hands were completely steady. I don't know how. Before any of that, though, before the conference room, before Carol and her folder, before any of it, there is a history that explains how I ended up in that chair. And it matters, because nothing that happened that Thursday morning made sense without understanding the 6 years that came before it. I joined Meridian Solutions in January of 2019, 28 years old, hired as a mid-level project coordinator out of a smaller consulting firm in Columbus, Ohio. Meridian was based in Cincinnati, a 45-minute commute I made without complaint 5 days a week for the first 2 years. The company specialized in operational efficiency consulting for mid to large-sized manufacturing clients, and when I arrived, the project management team was a scattered, underfunded, somewhat demoralized unit of 7 people who had been losing clients to competitors for 18 straight months. My first year, I stabilized 3 accounts that had been flagged for cancellation. I did it by actually talking to the clients, understanding what they needed, adjusting deliverables, rebuilding trust that had eroded under generic, process-obsessed previous project leads. By December of 2019, my client retention rate was 100%. That was not typical for the team. I was told by multiple people, including our division VP at the time, a man named Harold Finch who retired in early 2021, that I was the strongest project coordinator the department had seen in years. Ryan Cole became my direct manager in March of 2020, promoted from a lateral role in the Chicago satellite office, when Harold moved into a temporary VP advisory role during the pandemic restructuring. Ryan was 41 at the time, professionally polished, good in rooms, the kind of person who made strong first impressions and then slowly revealed himself to be someone else entirely, once the impression had been secured. I want to be fair about this. I tried to work well with Ryan. In the beginning, the relationship was functional. He gave me space to work, I delivered results, the feedback was positive, but I noticed things, small things. The way he credited himself in leadership meetings for client wins that came entirely from my work. The way he'd summarize my ideas in his own words 30 seconds after I'd said them, as if reformulating them made them his. The way he looked at me sometimes when a senior leader praised my work. Not pleased, not proud, not even neutral. Something darker than that. Something that looked honestly like it cost him something to hear. The first incident that I now understand as the earliest real warning sign happened in September of 2020. I had developed a new client onboarding framework that cut the average onboarding timeline from 11 weeks to 6. I presented it informally at a team meeting. Ryan said it was interesting, but needed development. Fine. 2 months later, at the annual divisional strategy presentation, Ryan presented an onboarding framework to the senior leadership team. It was mine. It was mine almost verbatim, with 3 cosmetic changes and his name on every slide. I confronted him privately. I kept it professional. I told him I recognized the framework and that it had been developed from my research. He told me I was confused. He said he'd been developing the concept independently. He said it wasn't unusual for similar ideas to emerge simultaneously, and he seemed almost disappointed in me, like I'd revealed a pettiness that he'd suspected but hoped wasn't there. I didn't push it. I had no documentation. I had no dated draft. I had mentioned it once in a casual team meeting that wasn't recorded, and he was my manager. I told myself to move on. I moved on. Over the next 3 years, the pattern held. I worked. I produced. The results were undeniable on the ground. Clients said it directly, in writing, in feedback surveys, in direct conversations. But when those results translated into formal performance evaluations, something got lost in translation. Not catastrophically. Not in any way I could point to directly and say, this is wrong, this is falsified, this is a lie. Just dampened. Like praise delivered through a filter that turned bright colors into muted ones. I applied for the senior project manager role for the first time in the spring of 2022. I was passed over for an external hire named Derek Walsh, who left the company 8 months later. I applied again in the fall of 2023. That time I was told I was a strong candidate, but that the timing wasn't right for the team. Then the position was quietly filled by a man named Marcus Webb, a close personal friend of Ryan's from his Chicago office days, who had fewer client relationships and a project success rate that, as far as anyone on the team could see, sat somewhere around 70%. I asked Ryan for a specific development plan. He gave me a vague document full of phrases like, continue to develop executive communication and deepen strategic ownership. No measurable benchmarks, no timeline, no definition for any of it. I requested a meeting with HR to ask about the formal promotion process. Ryan found out about the meeting before it happened. He never mentioned it directly, but after that, something shifted in the air between us. Whatever had been professional distance became something colder and more deliberate. He started canceling our one-on-ones. His email responses got shorter, took longer. He stopped including me in high-visibility presentations. I kept working. My numbers stayed high. I kept showing up. In January of 2025, I applied for the senior PM role a third time. I submitted a 22-page application packet, something I'd spent 2 months assembling, client ROI data, project timelines, before and after comparisons for every major account I'd touched, testimonials from clients, 3 of them submitted voluntarily without me asking. I included a strategic proposal for expanding Meridian's manufacturing vertical into 2 new geographic regions. A real proposal, 60 pages, that I'd worked on every night for 6 weeks. That was the application where I used the phrase executive presence to describe what I believed I brought to the team. I meant it earnestly. I believed it was true. Ryan submitted his evaluation of my application in early February. I never saw that evaluation. I had no idea what was in it. Then came March 6th, 7:49 in the morning, a calendar invite with no subject line. By the time he told me to look for entry-level positions elsewhere, I had delivered somewhere in the range of $14 million in client value over 6 years, by any honest accounting. That was the context. That was what was sitting in the room with us, invisible, when he smiled. Then Carol slid the document across the table, and the invisible became visible. The audit report was precise and damning in the way that only a forensic examination can be. Patricia Brennan, the external HR specialist who had been brought in 6 weeks earlier without announcement, had spent 5 weeks comparing Ryan's submitted performance evaluations against raw data, client satisfaction surveys submitted directly to Meridian's system, project completion records stored in the company's project management software, budget reconciliation files from finance, and email archives. The divergence was systematic and impossible to explain as error. My client satisfaction scores, which averaged 4.8 out of 5 across 32 client accounts, had been recorded in Ryan's evaluations as 3.1. My project success rate of 93%, which existed in the project management system as objective, time-stamped data, appeared in his formal evaluations as 71%. 3 projects I had delivered ahead of schedule and under budget were marked in his reports as delayed and over budget. The onboarding framework incident from September 2020, the one he'd told me I was confused about, was documented in the audit as a clear case of appropriated intellectual work because Patricia had found a dated email draft I'd sent to a colleague in September 2020 asking for feedback on the framework, 3 full weeks before Ryan's presentation. 11 pages, every page a different version of the same act. And it wasn't just me. The audit had flagged 4 other employees whose records showed the same pattern. 2 of them had left the company, one citing repeated failure to advance despite strong performance, one citing a hostile work environment. Both had been women. The 2 who remained were still in the building, still unaware, still grinding through evaluations they didn't know were rigged. I read to the 3rd page and stopped, not because I couldn't continue, but because I needed a second to understand understand what I was actually holding in my hands. 6 years. This had been happening for 6 years. I looked up from the document. Ryan was staring at the table. His hands were flat on the surface, pressing down, and I noticed his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle working in his cheek. Carol asked if I needed a moment. I said no. She continued. She said that in the course of Patricia Brennan's investigation, a secondary issue had surfaced, one that Patricia had been obligated to escalate immediately to Meridian's legal team. Carol nodded toward a folder at her elbow that I hadn't noticed until now, thicker than the first, with 2 additional rubber-banded sets of documents beside it. This was the moment I had planted in my mind earlier, the detail I hadn't understood at the time, but that now unlocked everything. 3 weeks before this meeting, in mid-February, 8 days after I'd submitted my promotion application, I had noticed that Ryan had asked me 3 separate times, casually in passing, what I knew about Apex Dynamics. Questions dressed up as small talk. Do you know anyone over there? Have you ever worked with their methodology? I remember thinking it was odd. Ryan wasn't someone who made small talk. I filed it away without knowing why. The emails in Carol's second folder answered the question. Ryan had been in direct communication with Scott Finch, VP of Operations at Apex Dynamics, Meridian's largest direct competitor, for 14 months. The email chain contained internal Meridian project methodologies, upcoming client proposals with pricing details, current client satisfaction scores by account, a draft of Meridian's 3-year expansion strategy that had been marked confidential and distributed only to director-level staff and above, and a list of Meridian's 12 highest-value client accounts with contact information and contract renewal dates. Ryan had not been given access to the expansion strategy document. He had obtained it from a director-level colleague under a false pretext, claiming he needed it for an internal benchmarking exercise that did not exist. The most recent email between Ryan and Scott Finch was dated 5 days before this meeting. In it, Scott confirmed a director-level offer, a $215,000 base salary, signing bonus, and an equity stake, contingent on Ryan successfully transitioning 3 of Meridian's top 12 client accounts to Apex within his first 90 days. Ryan's reply was enthusiastic. He had written that he was confident he could deliver. He said he had been positioning himself over the past year to ensure the transition would be seamless. He had been planning to take my clients with him, clients I had built from the ground up, spent 6 years earning the trust of, gone above and beyond for in ways that had nothing to do with a paycheck, and he had been planning to hand them to a competitor as his entry ticket to a better job. The conference room door opened. 2 people I had never seen entered carrying briefcases. Carol introduced them as attorneys from Meridian's employment litigation firm. They sat down and they didn't waste time on preamble. Ryan looked at the attorneys the way a man looks at something he's been trying not to think about and now cannot look away from. The lead attorney said the word espionage without blinking. He listed the violations calmly and completely. 15 contract violations, 4 confidentiality agreements breached, fiduciary fraud, theft of trade secrets under Ohio statute, tortious interference. He said a civil action was being filed that afternoon. He said an industry injunction was being sought against Ryan and Apex Dynamics jointly. He said the matter had been referred to federal law enforcement. Ryan's mouth opened. He said, I want to be very clear. The emails were taken out of context. The second attorney leaned forward. Ryan, she said, I would strongly advise you to stop talking and retain criminal defense counsel before you speak to anyone else, including us. Ryan stopped talking. He looked at me for a long time. I don't know what he was looking for. Maybe he thought I had something to do with the investigation, that I had triggered it, that this was something I had arranged. I hadn't. I had known nothing about any of it until 12 minutes before, when Carol slid that folder across the table. But he looked at me like he needed to find a version of this story where I was the one who had done something to him. He didn't find it, because it wasn't there. Carol turned to me. Her voice, which had been precise and formal throughout, softened by 1 degree. Not much, but I noticed it. She said that Meridian was deeply sorry for what I had experienced. She said that the falsification of my performance record had been confirmed, and that corrective action was being taken with immediate effect. She said that, effective that day, I was being promoted to senior project manager. The salary increase was 23%, backdated to the date of Ryan's first falsified evaluation, a point that carried a dollar amount she named precisely, $31,400 in retroactive compensation, plus a retention bonus of $38,000, plus a formal written apology from the company to be placed in my permanent HR file. She also said they wanted to discuss a fast track to director level within the next fiscal year. I said I appreciated that. I kept my voice steady. The attorneys were already asking Ryan to remain in the room. Ryan was already looking at the door. I stood up, adjusted the laptop bag on my shoulder, the same bag I'd walked in with, still on my shoulder the whole time, because I'd never even had the chance to set it down. And I looked at Ryan one last time. Something in me wanted to say something, some clean, devastating sentence that would land exactly right and stay with him. I had 6 years of material. I could have built something. But I looked at him sitting there between 2 attorneys, his face the color of old concrete, and I understood something that I hadn't expected to understand in that moment. He had known all along what I was worth. That was the whole problem. He had never underestimated me. He had seen exactly what I was capable of, understood precisely what it threatened, and spent 6 years making sure no one above him could see what he saw. The sabotage wasn't contempt. It was fear, dressed up as contempt. That didn't make it forgivable, but it made it comprehensible in a way that that actually felt worse. I didn't say anything. I walked to the door. My hand on the handle, I paused for exactly 1 second. Not for effect, just because I needed to take a breath. And then I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt, honestly, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The rest of that Thursday happened in pieces. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 22 minutes. I called my sister Maya from the driver's seat and told her what had just happened in a voice I'm still not sure was completely steady. Maya said, "I always hated him," which made me laugh, which was possibly the first time I had laughed in 6 weeks. Then I went home. I sat on my couch with my shoes still on, and I just stayed there for a while, not thinking about anything particular, just letting the last several hours move through me. The aftermath was louder than I expected. By Friday morning, word had moved through the building the way word moves through an office, not through official channels, but through the 3 or 4 people who had been in peripheral proximity to something significant and couldn't keep entirely quiet about it. People I barely knew sent me LinkedIn messages saying they'd always respected my work. 3 colleagues sent texts, real texts, not group chat responses, saying they were glad the truth had come out, that they'd noticed things for years and hadn't known what to say. One of those texts came from Derek Walsh, the external hire who had been given the senior PM role in 2022 over my first application. He wrote, "I always felt uncomfortable about how I got that role. Now I think I know why." That one stayed with me. 2 of Ryan's internal allies, both men he'd mentored and promoted, both recipients of evaluations that the audit later confirmed had been artificially inflated, distanced themselves from him completely within 48 hours. One of them, a project lead named Tom Garrett, came to my desk on Friday afternoon and said he was sorry. He didn't specify exactly what for, but I understood. He shook my hand and walked away. I appreciated that more than I could explain in the moment. Ryan's attorney sent a letter to Meridian's legal team on Friday evening, claiming the emails had been mischaracterized, that Ryan had been engaged in what he described as competitive market research, and that the performance evaluations had been conducted in good faith using metrics he had personally developed. Metrics he claimed were proprietary to his management methodology. Meridian's response was brief, I was told. Something to the effect of, "We'll see each other in court." Ryan did not return to the office. His access card was deactivated the afternoon of the Thursday meeting, and his email auto-reply had been set by IT, not by him. His desk was emptied by a building services crew on Friday morning, while most of the team was in the weekly project sync. A few people noticed. Nobody said much about it. The 2 other employees still at Meridian whose records had been falsified were identified to HR through the audit, and were each given corrective evaluations and compensation adjustments. I didn't know who they were for several weeks. It wasn't my business to know. But later, I was told one of them had been passed over for a promotion 4 times. 4 times. Same story. Different person. It made my chest tight in a way that didn't have anything to do with my own situation. 3 days after the Thursday meeting, Carol called me back in. Not to her conference room, but to her actual office, which I'd never been in before. It was quieter than I expected. Plants on the windowsill, case files in color-coded binders, a framed photo of what I assumed was her family at some kind of mountain cabin. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen from her on Thursday. Whatever she'd been carrying through the investigation, she'd held it together in that room, and now she didn't have to hold it together quite as much. Paul Soren, the CEO, was seated in one of the chairs in front of Carol's desk. The COO, a woman named Linda Cho, stood near the window. I sat down and looked at them and understood immediately that this wasn't a conversation about the senior PM position. Paul said that in reviewing the full scope of what had happened, the falsified records, the espionage, the scope of the audit, the leadership team had done a lot of internal reflection, not just about Ryan, but about the systems that had allowed it to happen, about oversight gaps, about the fact that it had taken an anonymous complaint, one they had not originated themselves, to surface something that had been occurring for years inside their own organization. Linda said they were restructuring the project management division, expanding it, creating a new role that hadn't existed before, Director of Client Operations, designed to sit above the senior PM tier and work directly with divisional leadership to manage client strategy, team development, and operational standards. They were offering the role to me, not the fast track they'd mentioned Thursday, not a future conversation. The role now effective in 30 days. At a salary that made everything that had come before it, the 6 years, the blocked promotions, the rigged evaluations, the stolen framework, feel like an absurd, years-long detour. I asked if I could have the weekend to think about it. Paul said, of course. He paused before standing up, and he said something that I didn't expect from a CEO in a formal setting, something that felt genuinely unscripted. He said that what Ryan had done to my career was inexcusable, and that while the company couldn't give me back the years, they intended to demonstrate through what happened next that they understood the weight of that. I said I appreciated that. I meant it. I accepted the role on Monday morning. I emailed Carol at 8:02 a.m. She replied within 4 minutes with a single line, "We're glad to have you where you should be." I've been in the director role for 7 months now. The work is harder and better and more alive than anything I did before. My team is 12 people, 6 of them promoted from within on my recommendation in the first quarter. 2 of them have been at Meridian for 4 or more years without advancing. I know what that experience is. I know what it does to a person to show up and work and believe it's going somewhere, and to be blocked by something invisible that you can't name. I don't run my team the way Ryan ran his. I'm specific. I'm honest. I document things carefully and transparently. I give people the evaluations they earn. The civil case against Ryan settled in October. I wasn't a party to the settlement, but I was told the terms involved Ryan agreeing to a substantial financial judgment, a multi-year industry restriction, and a non-disparagement clause. Apex Dynamics was named in the suit as well and settled separately. Scott Finch left the company. Ryan's employment attorney released a statement saying his client maintained that the emails had been misrepresented, but the settlement signature said something different. I don't know where Ryan is now. I don't spend much time thinking about it. What I think about sometimes in the early morning before work when the apartment is quiet and the coffee is still brewing is the version of him that was competent enough to see what I was capable of and afraid enough to spend 6 years trying to contain it. That version understood something real. He knew, maybe better than anyone above him, what I was worth. He just used that knowledge to harm instead of to build. There's a specific kind of grief in realizing that someone saw you clearly and chose to use that clarity against you. Not the grief of being invisible, the grief of being seen and then deliberately diminished anyway. It's a lonelier feeling than being overlooked, because being overlooked is impersonal. Being targeted is not. I lost 6 years. Not entirely. I built things in those years, learned things, became someone I respect, but I lost the promotions I had earned, the salary I should have been making, the recognition that should have come and didn't. I lost some faith in the version of myself that trusted people in authority to see what I saw. I lost some of the uncomplicated belief that good work done honestly and consistently would always be enough. It wasn't enough, not on its own. What made it enough eventually was a forensic specialist named Patricia Brennan being thorough enough to see what Ryan had obscured, and Carol Vance being principled enough to bring it into a room and lay it on the table, and a company being willing, under pressure, yes, but still willing, to look directly at something uncomfortable and do the harder right thing. That matters. I don't want to minimize it, but I also know that plenty of people in my position don't get that moment. Plenty of people go through the same years, build the same record, hit the same ceiling, and never find out why. They leave. They downsize their ambitions. They carry the weight of someone else's fear for the rest of their careers and never get to set it down. I was lucky, in a very specific way. Not lucky that it happened. Lucky that it surfaced. I walked into that conference room on March 6th as a woman who had been told she would never move up. I walked out as someone who finally understood, with complete and documented clarity, that the ceiling had never been mine. It had been his. And when it was removed, there was nothing between me and the sky.